97104.com. Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to the Richard James Show on 17104, The Voice. Greetings and salutations. It's another day. We had a wonderful Easter. The weather has not been the greatest, but when people get together, particularly after that virus, when we're not able to do it, uh, it's a really, really good thing. I had my daughter over and my two grandsons and my lovely wife, and we had a great time. I'm hoping you enjoyed Easter. Easter is a very, very important holiday in the Christian religion. Well, we like to uh, often lift up Mother Africa. Our ancestry and where we came from has a lot to do with where we're going, knowing that. And there was one gentleman that was internationally known and is probably the greatest uh, and best known leader on the African continent. His name was Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela. And we're going to raise up Nelson Mandela today, and an individual who we also think very highly of, the former president of the United States of African descent, President Barack Obama, made a presentation in South Africa and celebrating the centennial of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was born in 1918 and he passed away in 2013, the centennial of Nelson Mandela. What made Nelson Mandela so great? First of all, we have to establish, and I think that the world knows, that Africa was probably the most colonized of all of the continents. In fact, the entire world uh, was poised to try to decolonize itself. We had colonies. We had the influence, particularly of Great Britain, of France, of Portugal, uh, Italy. European nations, white nations, have risen itself up out of obscurity uh, and through industrialization and through actually establishing some very strong and powerful weaponry, went around the world taking over people's countries. It was no different in the continent of Africa. As a matter of fact, it was especially bad in Africa. Only one nation resisted and was able to keep the colonists at bay, and that was the country of Ethiopia. And South Africa was a very, very large country, and it was first dominated by the Dutch, Germanic people, Afrikaners were the original settlers uh, on African land in South Africa. The Afrikaners, uh, very, very racist people, very, very inhumane people. Uh, and then the British came in. As a matter of fact, there were wars between the British uh, and the Afrikaners uh, in terms of who would steal the most land and rape the country of its natural resources. Well, there was resistance to this. You had your native born Africans. Uh, we had past nations and past empires, such as Zululand, which had one of its principal leaders was Shaka Zulu. The Zulus had a strong tribe and a very, very large tribe. And there were other tribes. And there was a organization that was put together that was eventually headed by Nelson Mandela. Uh, who was Nelson Mandela? Nelson Mandela basically became the Martin Luther King, the Mahatma Gandhi of South Africa. And Nelson Mandela dedicated his life to the liberation of South Africa. You had a situation that was interesting. You have a had a pretty large uh, white population in South Africa. Uh, a little different. You had less representation of white in some of the other nations, such as Ghana and Kenya. South Africa had a large number of Caucasians, and they had built up a structure really benefiting themselves within that country. They had built up industry, and to the point where South Africa was one of the major economies, one of the major uh, nations in terms of utilizing its natural resources. And number two economy on the continent of Africa. The number one economy on the continent of Africa is Nigeria. But South Africa had a large population of whites and whites that were generational, not just recently migrating to South Africa, but had been there for a couple of hundred years. And that's a fact. And now Nelson Mandela, and leading the struggle to bring about freedom and equality in South Africa, uh, was arrested on a number of occasions, and his last arrest was the most detrimental. He was placed in prison and remained on the island for 27 years. Can you imagine a man who has really committed no crime, whose only crime is to bend the arc of freedom toward justice, was arrested and put in jail for 27 years. He had married a woman by the name of Winnie Mandela, beautiful woman, physically, and brilliant and intelligent woman, but also a very, very devoted wife uh, and a strong leader. And they abused her. She was in prison on many occasions. I mean, they did everything to destroy this strong woman in South Africa who stood by the side of her husband uh, for 27 years. And they were under the control of the state, so they were not able to interact and see each other maybe once every 6 months. It was just a horrible situation. So they did everything to destroy Nelson, and he didn't have plush quarters now. He was kept into something like a hole. He was not allowed, like I said, very much in the way of visitation. Uh, he was sent to hard labor. He had to break up rocks. I mean, they treated him as if he was less than a human being. And by the way, the South Africans, the Afrikaners, nor the Brits felt that blacks were their equals. They felt that they were inferior, and they treated them that way. Nelson Mandela, uh, I think, was God sent. He had the not only the leadership skills, but he had the human skills to be able to interact with people. And it's amazing that he went to prison and remained there for a long time. And when he came out of prison, he was not really a bitter man. He was a man that saw himself as a leader of his people and wanted to bring his people together. We have a wonderful video of a speech at the centennial celebration in South Africa, a speech that was presented by former President Barack Obama. I have to say this: we miss the intellect and the morality of Barack Obama. Uh, when Trump became president, the morality was out of the window. Uh, when Trump became president, the leadership ability throughout the world was out the window. Barack Obama was a leader among men. You may recall, even before he became president and after, that whenever he spoke, the world stood up and listened. I'm talking about Barack Obama. He would have hundreds of thousands of people that would listen to him and would try to support him. And you'll see that in this video. We're not gonna do the whole video. It's too long, but we're gonna give you a taste of the speech, and you can see the audience reaction in South Africa to Barack Obama. And by the way, this is a not only a predominantly black audience, but it's a mixed audience. One thing about Nelson Mandela, he also treated the people who had enslaved them or who had created apartheid with dignity. They had a reconciliation committee in which they reviewed the war crimes that had occurred, and through that reconciliation committee, tried to deal with those issues, but also tried to bring people together. So let's just take a look at that video, and then we're going to cut in and have some more dialogue. See, this is Nelson Mandela Centennial Celebration. The spokesperson is Barack Obama, former president of the United States, who was born in Hawaii, but of white American and of African American, African Kenyan people. We'll roll the video. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. To Mama Gracia, Michelle, members of the Mandela family, Michelle family, to President Ramaphosa, who you can see is inspiring new hope in this great country. Professor, doctor, distinguished guests, to Mama Sisulu and the Sisulu family, to the people of South Africa, it is a singular honor for me to be here with all of you as we gather to celebrate the birth and life of one of history's true giants. Let me begin by a correction and a few confessions. The correction is that I am a very good dancer. I just want to be clear about that. Michelle is a little better. The confessions. Number one, I was not exactly invited to be here. I was ordered in a very nice way to be here by Gracia Michelle. Confession number two. I forgot my geography and the fact that right now it's winter in South Africa. I didn't bring a coat, and this morning I had to send somebody out to the mall because I am wearing long johns. I was born in Hawaii. Confession number three. When my staff told me that I was to deliver a lecture, I thought back to the stuffy old professors in bow ties and tweed, and I wondered if this was one more sign of the stage of life that I'm entering, along with gray hair and slightly failing eyesight. I thought about the fact that my daughters think anything I tell them is a lecture. I thought about the American press and how they often got frustrated at my long-winded answers at press conferences when my responses didn't conform to 2-minute sound bites. But given the strange and uncertain times that we are in, and they are strange, and they are uncertain, with each day's news cycles bringing more head-spinning and disturbing headlines, I thought maybe it would be useful to step back for a moment and try to get some perspective. So I hope you'll indulge me, despite the slight chill, as I spend much of this lecture reflecting on where we've been and how we arrived at this present moment, in the hope that it will offer us a roadmap for where we need to go next. 100 years ago, Madiba was born in the village. Oh, let's see there, I always get that. I got to get my M's right when I'm in South Africa. Vezo. I got it. Truthfully, it's because it's so cold, my lips stuck. So in his autobiography, he describes a happy childhood. He's looking after cattle, he's playing with the other boys. Eventually attends a school where his teacher gave him the English name Nelson. And as many of you know, he's quoted saying, "Why she bestowed this particular name upon me, I have no idea. There was no reason to believe that a young black boy at this time, in this place, could in any way alter history." After all, South Africa was then less than a decade removed from full British control. Already laws were being codified to implement racial segregation and subjugation, the network of laws that would be known as apartheid. Most of Africa, including my father's homeland, was under colonial rule. The dominant European powers, having ended a horrific world war just a few months after Madiba's birth, viewed this continent and its people primarily as spoils in a contest for territory and abundant natural resources and cheap labor, and the inferiority of the black race, an indifference towards black culture and interests and aspirations was a given. And such a view of the world, that certain races, certain nations, certain groups were inherently superior, and that violence and coercion is the primary basis for governance, that the strong necessarily exploit the weak, that wealth is determined primarily by conquest. That view of the world was hardly confined to relations between Europe and Africa, or relations between whites and blacks. Whites were happy to exploit other whites when they could. And by the way, blacks were often willing to exploit other blacks. And around the globe, the majority of people lived at subsistence levels, without a say in the politics or economic forces that determined their lives. Often they were subject to the whims and cruelties of distant leaders. The average person saw no possibility of advancing from the circumstances of their birth. Women were almost uniformly subordinate to men. Privilege and status was rigidly bound by caste and color and ethnicity and religion. And even in my own country, even in democracies like the United States, founded on a declaration that all men are created equal, racial segregation and systemic discrimination was the law in almost half the country and the norm throughout the rest of the country. That was the world just 100 years ago. There are people alive today who were alive in that world. It is hard then to overstate the remarkable transformations that have taken place since that time. A second world war, even more terrible than the first, along with a cascade of liberation movements from Africa to Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, would finally bring an end to colonial rule. More and more peoples, having witnessed the horrors of totalitarianism, the repeated mass slaughters of the 20th century, began to embrace a new vision for humanity, a new idea, one based not only on the principle of national self-determination, but also on the principles of democracy and rule of law and civil rights and the inherent dignity of every single individual. In those nations with market-based economies, suddenly union movements developed, and health and safety and commercial regulations were instituted, and access to public education was expanded, and social welfare systems emerged, all with the aim of constraining the excesses of capitalism and enhancing its ability to provide opportunity not just to some but to all people. And the result was unmatched economic growth and a growth of a middle class. And in my own country, the moral force of the civil rights movement not only overthrew Jim Crow laws, but it opened up the floodgates for women and historically marginalized groups to reimagine themselves, to find their own voices, to make their own claims to full citizenship. It was in service of this long walk towards freedom and justice and equal opportunity that Nelson Mandela devoted his life. At the outset, his struggle was particular to this place, to his homeland. A fight to end apartheid, a fight to ensure lasting political and social and economic equality for its disenfranchised non-white citizens. But through his sacrifice and unwavering leadership, and perhaps most of all through his moral example, Mandela and the movement he led would come to signify something larger. He came to embody the universal aspirations of dispossessed people all around the world, their hopes for a better life, the possibility of a moral transformation in the conduct of human affairs. Madiba's light shone so brightly even from that narrow Robben Island cell, that in the late 70s, he could inspire a young college student on the other side of the world to re-examine his own priorities, could make me consider the small role I might play in bending the arc of the world towards justice. And when later, as a law student, I witnessed Madiba emerge from prison just a few months, you'll recall, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, I felt the same wave of hope that washed through hearts all around the world. You remember that feeling? It seemed as if the forces of progress were on the march, that they were inexorable. Each step he took, you felt this is the moment when the old structures of violence and repression and ancient hatreds that had so long stunted people's lives and confined the human spirit, that all that was crumbling before our eyes. And then, as Madiba guided this nation through negotiation, painstakingly, reconciliation, its first fair and free elections, as we all witnessed the grace and the generosity with which he embraced former enemies,
Yeah.
the wisdom for him to step away from power once he felt his job was complete. He understood that it was not just the subjugated, the oppressed who were being freed from the shackles of the past. The subjugator was being offered a gift, being given a chance to see in a new way, being given a chance to participate in the work of building a better world. Now, during the last decades of the 20th century, the progressive democratic vision that Nelson Mandela represented in many ways set the terms of the international political debate. It doesn't mean that vision was always victorious, but it set the terms, the parameters. It guided how we thought about the meaning of progress. And it continued to propel the world forward. Yes, there were still tragedies, bloody civil wars, from the Balkans to the Congo. Despite the fact that ethnic and sectarian strife still flared up with heartbreaking regularity. Despite all that, as a consequence of the continuation of nuclear detente, a peaceful and prosperous Japan, and a unified Europe anchored in NATO, and the entry of China into the world's system of trade, all that greatly reduced the prospect of war between the world's great powers. And from Europe to Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, dictatorships began to give way to democracies. The march was on. A respect for human rights and the rule of law, enumerated in a declaration by the United Nations, became the guiding norm for the majority of nations, even in places where the reality fell far short of the ideal. Even when those human rights were violated, those who violated human rights were on the defensive. And with these geopolitical changes came sweeping economic changes. The introduction of market-based principles in which previously closed economies, along with the forces of global integration powered by new technologies, suddenly unleashed entrepreneurial talents to those that once had been relegated to the periphery of the world economy. who hadn't counted, suddenly they counted. They had some power. They had the possibilities of doing business. And then came scientific breakthroughs and new infrastructure and the reduction of armed conflicts. And suddenly, 1 billion people were lifted out of poverty. And once starving nations were able to feed themselves. And infant mortality rates plummeted. And meanwhile, the spread of the internet made it possible for people to connect across oceans. And cultures and continents instantly were brought together. And potentially, all the world's knowledge could be in the hands of a small child in even the most remote village. That's what happened just over the course of a few decades. And all that progress is real. It has been broad, and it has been deep. And it all happened in what, by the standards of human history, was nothing more than a blink of an eye. And now an entire generation has grown up in a world that, by most measures, has gotten steadily freer and healthier and wealthier and less violent and more tolerant during the course of their lifetimes. It should make us hopeful. But if we cannot deny the very real strides that our world has made since that moment when Madiba took those steps out of confinement, we also have to recognize all the ways that the international order has fallen short of its promise. In fact, it is in part because of the failures of governments and powerful elites to squarely address the shortcomings and contradictions of this international order that we now see much of the world threatening to return to an older, a more dangerous, a more brutal way of doing business. So we have to start by admitting that whatever laws may have existed on the books, whatever wonderful pronouncements existed in constitutions, whatever nice words were spoken during these last several decades at international conferences or in the halls of the United Nations, the previous structures of privilege and power and injustice and exploitation never completely went away. They were never fully dislodged. Caste differences still impact the life chances of people in the Indian subcontinent. Ethnic and religious differences still determine who gets opportunity from Central Europe to the Gulf. It is a plain fact that racial discrimination still exists in both the United States and South Africa. And it is also a fact that the accumulated disadvantages of years of institutionalized oppression have created yawning disparities in income and in wealth and in education and in health, in personal safety, in access to credit. Women and girls around the world continue to be blocked from positions of power and authority. They continue to be prevented from getting a basic education. They are disproportionately victimized by violence and abuse. They're still paid less than men for doing the same work. That's still happening. Economic opportunity, for all the magnificence of the global economy, all the shining skyscrapers that have transformed the landscape around the world, entire neighborhoods, entire cities, entire regions, entire nations have been bypassed. In other words, for far too many people, the more things have changed, the more things stayed the same. And while globalization and technology have opened up new opportunities, have driven remarkable economic growth in previously struggling parts of the world, globalization has also upended the agricultural and manufacturing sectors in many countries, has also greatly reduced the demand for certain workers, has helped weaken unions and laborers' bargaining power. It's made it easier for capital to avoid tax laws and the regulations of nation states, can just move billions, trillions of dollars with a tap of a computer key. And the result of all these trends has been an explosion in economic inequality. It's meant that a few dozen individuals control the same amount of wealth as the poorest half of humanity. That's not an exaggeration, that's a statistic. Think about that. In many middle-income and developing countries, new wealth has just tracked the old bad deal that people got because it reinforced or even compounded existing patterns of inequality. The only difference is it created even greater opportunities for corruption on an epic scale. And for once solidly middle-class families in advanced economies like the United States, these trends have meant greater economic insecurity, especially for those who don't have specialized skills, people who were in manufacturing, people working in factories, people working on farms. In every country, just about, the disproportionate economic clout of those at the top has provided these individuals with wildly disproportionate influence on their country's political life and on its media, on what policies are pursued and whose interests end up being ignored. Now, it should be noted that this new international elite, the professional class that supports them, differs in important respects from the ruling aristocracies of old. It includes many who are self-made. It includes champions of meritocracy. And although still mostly white and male, as a group, they reflect a diversity of nationalities and ethnicities that would have not existed 100 years ago. A decent percentage consider themselves liberal in their politics, modern and cosmopolitan in their outlook, unburdened by parochialism or nationalism or overt racial prejudice or strong religious sentiment. They are equally comfortable in New York or London or Shanghai or Nairobi or Buenos Aires or Johannesburg. Many are sincere and effective in their philanthropy. Some of them count Nelson Mandela among their heroes. Some even supported Barack Obama for the presidency of the United States. And by virtue of my status as a former head of state, some of them consider me as an honorary member of the club. You know, I get invited to these fancy things, you know. They'll fly me out. But what's nevertheless true is that in their business dealings, many titans of industry and finance are increasingly detached from any single locale or nation state. They live lives more and more insulated from the struggles of ordinary people in their countries of origin. And their decisions to shut down a manufacturing plant or to try to minimize their tax bill by shifting profits to a tax haven with the help of high-priced accountants or lawyers, or their decision to take advantage of lower-cost immigrant labor, or their decision to pay a bribe, are often done without malice. It's just a rational response they consider to the demands of their balance sheets and their shareholders and competitive pressures. But too often these decisions are also made without reference to notions of human solidarity or a ground-level understanding of the consequences that will be felt by particular people in particular communities by the decisions that they're made. And from their boardrooms or retreats, global decision makers don't get a chance to see sometimes the pain in the faces of laid-off workers. Their kids don't suffer when cuts in public education and health care result as a consequence of a reduced tax base because of tax avoidance. They can't hear the resentment of an older tradesman when he complains that a newcomer doesn't speak his language on a job site when he once worked. They're less subject to the discomfort and the displacement that some of their countrymen may feel as globalization scrambles not only existing economic arrangements, but traditional social and religious mores. Which is why, at the end of the 20th century, while some Western commentators were declaring the end of history and the inevitable triumph of liberal democracy and the virtues of the global supply chain, so many missed signs of a brewing backlash. A backlash that arrived in so many forms. It announced itself most violently with 9/11 and the emergence of transnational terrorist networks, fueled by an ideology that perverted one of the world's great religions and asserted a struggle not just between Islam and the West, but between Islam and modernity. And an ill-advised U.S. invasion of Iraq didn't help, accelerating a sectarian conflict. Russia, already humiliated by its reduced influence since the collapse of the Soviet Union, feeling threatened by democratic movements along its borders, suddenly started reasserting authoritarian control, and in some cases meddling with its neighbors. China, emboldened by its economic success, started bristling against criticism of its human rights record. It framed the promotion of universal values as nothing more than foreign meddling, imperialism under a new name. Within the United States, within the European Union, challenges to globalization first came from the left, but then came more forcefully from the right. As you started seeing populist movements, which, by the way, are often cynically funded by right-wing billionaires intent on reducing government constraints on their business interests. These movements tapped the unease that was felt by many people who lived outside of the urban cores, fears that economic security was slipping away, that their social status and privileges were eroding, that their cultural identities were being threatened by outsiders, somebody that didn't look like them or sound like them or pray as they did. And perhaps more than anything else, the devastating impact of the 2008 financial crisis, in which the reckless behavior of financial elites resulted in years of hardship for ordinary people all around the world, made all the previous assurances of experts ring hollow. All those assurances that somehow financial regulators knew what they were doing, that somebody was minding the store, that global economic integration was an unadulterated good. Because of the actions taken by governments during and after that crisis, including, I should add, by aggressive steps by my administration, the global economy has now returned to healthy growth. But the credibility of the international system, the faith in experts in places like Washington or Brussels, all that had taken a blow. And a politics of fear and resentment and retrenchment began to appear. And that kind of politics is now on the move. It's on a move at a pace that would have seemed unimaginable just a few years ago. I am not being alarmist, I am simply stating the facts. Look around. Strongman politics are ascendant suddenly, whereby elections and some pretense of democracy are maintained, the form of it, but those in power seek to undermine every institution or norm that gives democracy meaning. In the West, you've got far-right parties that oftentimes are based not just on platforms of protectionism and closed borders, but also on barely hidden racial nationalism. Many developing countries now are looking at China's model of authoritarian control combined with mercantilist capitalism as preferable to the messiness of democracy. Who needs free speech as long as the economy is going good? The free press is under attack. Censorship and state control of media is on the rise. Social media, once seen as a mechanism to promote knowledge and understanding and solidarity, has proved to be just as effective promoting hatred and paranoia and propaganda and conspiracy theories. So, on Madiba's 100th birthday, we now stand at a crossroads. A moment in time at which two very different visions of humanity's future compete for the hearts and the minds of citizens around the world. Two different stories, two different narratives about who we are and who we should be. How should we respond? Should we see that wave of hope that we felt with Madiba's release from prison, from the Berlin Wall coming down? Should we see that hope that we had as naive and misguided? Should we understand the last 25 years of global integration as nothing more than a detour from the previous inevitable cycle of history where might makes right in politics is a hostile competition between tribes and races and religions, and nations compete in a zero-sum game, constantly teetering on the edge of conflict until full-blown war breaks out? Is that what we think? Let me tell you what I believe. I believe in Nelson Mandela's vision. I believe in a vision shared by Gandhi and King and Abraham Lincoln. I believe in a vision of equality and justice and freedom and multiracial democracy, built on the premise that all people are created equal and they're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. And I believe that a world governed by such principles is possible, and that it can achieve more peace and more cooperation in pursuit of a common good. That's what I believe. And I believe we have no choice but to move forward. That those of us who believe in democracy and civil rights and a common humanity have a better story to tell. And I believe this not just based on sentiment. I believe it based on hard evidence. The fact that the world's most prosperous and successful societies, the ones with the highest living standards and the highest levels of satisfaction among their people, happen to be those which have most closely approximated the liberal progressive ideal that we talk about, and have nurtured the talents and contributions of all their citizens. The fact that authoritarian governments have been shown time and time again to breed corruption because they're not accountable, to repress their people, to lose touch eventually with reality, to engage in bigger and bigger lies that ultimately result in economic and political and cultural and scientific stagnation. Look at history. Look at the facts. The fact that countries which rely on rabid nationalism and xenophobia and doctrines of tribal, racial, or religious superiority as their main organizing principle, the thing that holds people together, eventually those countries find themselves consumed by civil war or external war. Check the history books. The fact that technology cannot be put back in a bottle. So we're stuck with the fact that we now live close together, and populations are going to be moving. And environmental challenges are not going to go away on their own. So that the only way to effectively address problems like climate change or mass migration or pandemic disease will be to develop systems for more international cooperation, not less. We have a better story to tell. But to say that our vision for the future is better is not to say that it will inevitably win. Because history also shows the power of fear. History shows the lasting hold of greed and the desire to dominate others in the minds of men.
Oh, oh, freedom. Oh,
History shows how
oh,
easily people can be
freedom.
convinced
Oh,
to turn on those.
freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. No segregation, no segregation, no segregation over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. I woke up this morning with my mind stay on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind stay on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind. My Lord, he said, stay on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. I'm gonna walk, walk, and then I'm talk, talk, and then I'm walk, walk with my mind on freedom. Walk, walk, and then talk, talk, and then walk. Walk with my mind on freedom. Hallelujah. 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 Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard a brilliant speech by President Barack Obama lifting up the centennial celebration of Nelson Mandela, born in 1918, died in 2013. We don't have the time to listen to the entire speech. It's a very long speech, but it's a very meaningful speech. And sometimes things like that touch me, and I think about the movement and the dedication that exists with people in this country trying to overthrow bigotry and segregation. There's no more difference between segregation and apartheid. Apartheid is segregation. And we have found that it's violent, it's demeaning, it's built on a caste system in which some people are considered better than others, and it begins to destroy our society. Uh, you can integrate schools, you can integrate lunch counters, but if you don't integrate the economy and give people, no matter what their color, the ability to economically pull themselves up out of poverty, then you still have a problem. Barack Obama was president of the United States for 8 years, and he did the best he could. He saved the economy. He came up with a stimulus package and a bill that restored us. We were on our way sliding down the sewer of economic deprivation, and it was Barack Obama, along with the assistance of Joe Biden, that picked us up out of that sewer and allowed us to continue. Uh, he tried his best to do what he can to make things better for all people. He did some good, but there also were people in the background that was doing everything they could to make sure that his administration was not a success. As a matter of fact, probably Mandela had he had opposition, he had problems, but he was able to make some changes because he reached out. He did not condemn or step on the former racist leaders of apartheid. He tried to pull together a government of all the people for the people. And Barack did the same thing. He tried to pull people together. Um, Many white folks were afraid of the fact that we had a black president, and they assumed that they would be oppressed, but they weren't. Uh, and another thing, we do have a right wing situation, even within faith. That if you, I don't believe the way you believe, or you don't believe the way I believe, then there's something wrong with you. Well, we are going to continue to lift up the truth. And this celebration of Nelson Mandela is a way of doing it. And he, even though he's gone physically, he's buried in his grave, but he's no longer a slave. And the spirit of Nelson Mandela still exists. The spirit of Guam Nkrumah still exists. The spirit of Patrice Lumumba still exists. People who have tried and lifted up the bloodstained banner, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who dedicated his life to ending segregation and to ending poverty. Mahatma Gandhi, who was assassinated, lifted up a nonviolent peaceful kind of revolution. So it is not impossible for us to succeed. And it's something that even the grave cannot end and cannot stop. They cannot stop progress when people really want something to go after. Brothers and sisters, thank you for tuning in. Want to let you know that we still have our business in the Lebanon Valley Farmers Market at 35 South 8th Street in the city of downtown Lebanon. And we're still reaching out. You see, we have beautiful drums. We still have original oil paintings from Guinea-Bissau. We have jewelry. We have original oils that are not watered down. We have statues from Kenya, from and all kinds of things. Come by to see us. We even have African clothing for men and for women, and 5 foot giraffes. Come by to see us. We need your support. We need your help because we won't survive without you. I'll tell you straight up. We're not geniuses. We were not born with a silver spoon in our mouths. We've taken what little resources we had to put together an entrepreneur endeavor that will help not only us, but also the folks that we buy our material from. We believe in fair trade. We believe in equalization and treating people fairly. And we don't try to make it all on one sale. We sometimes give discounts. Uh, but we want you to come and join us and also begin to lift up uh, all people, no matter what their race or their color. I'm African American. I love my people, but I also love people who are not African American, whether they're Indian, whether they're Puerto Rican, whether they're Mexican, whether they're Caucasian, or Swedish. And we will take that love and we'll plant it in the seeds with justice and equal opportunity. Until we get a chance to see you again, God bless you and keep you, and may heaven smile upon you. Uh, we want to thank our sponsors. We want to thank the producers of this show, the Thomases, that continue to keep us on the air. And we want to thank God for the ability to do it and do it well. Thank you so much. And we'll until next week, this is Richard James signing off. Peace and love. So long. Thank you. Thank you again for tuning in to the Richard James Show. Our African and our African American programs are set up to educate you on what's going on in this world. We thank you for taking out the time to listen. Let us hear from you sometime also. So this is your neighbor and your friend signing off. Until I see you again next week and hear from you again next week. So long. God bless.